So again, welcome. I'm Steve Jones. I run SQLServerCentral.com. I started the site about 11 years ago, and that's kind of my job. I was a DBA before that, like many of you, I'm a developer. I also work for Redgate Software. They're my employer, so that's why I'm here. All right, today, the talk is prepare for disaster, and what I really want to talk about is 4 different disasters that can occur, and we'll talk just a little bit about what you might do when they happen, but I also want to kind of go back and say, all right, if I could rewind the clock and I could think about this ahead of time, what changes would I make? What preparations would I put in place to mitigate the disasters or perhaps lessen the impact? So that's our agenda. And I want to start with this film. Has anybody seen this film, by the way? This short little animated film. It's called The Movie Vanishes. It's by Pixar. And you can Google it. The link is here in the deck if you want to download it. And it's interesting. It's about Toy Story 2. In 1999, Pixar was making Toy Story 2, which at the time was their 3rd film. Pixar had been in business about 20 years. They'd had a lot of experience. They'd written a lot of their own software, a lot of technical people there. And they'd had Toy Story 1 and A Bug's Life, very successful films. They made a lot of money on them, very profitable company. And at the time, this was a $90 million film. So I don't know what that is in pounds, 85 pounds or something. Our currency isn't doing so well, but it was probably the most expensive animated film at the time. One day, somebody in Pixar runs RM Star on their Unix machines, or Linux machine. I don't know if you're familiar with RM Star. It's the equivalent of rmdir in DOS or command prompt, which means it starts to remove everything as quickly as possible off the system. In about 30 seconds, it wiped out their main rendering development system, however they build the films. And so they flushed a lot of work down the tubes. They estimated 20 or 30 people in a year could not recreate this work. And there was actually a real danger that Toy Story 2 might not be released. So what do? Right? The user deletes everything. What do? They call the IT guy. And they're like, please, 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 please restore something. Please put things back together. Turns out, they had a bug in their software that they had written, they'd written, and it was a bug in Unix as well that meant they could not restore from backup. They actually had a real disaster. Now, if you want to know what happened, please download the film or go watch it on YouTube or something. It's kind of humorous. My kids had a good time watching it. It's kind of funny. But the key takeaway here is that this was a mature company. This is a company that's been in business for 20 years. Right? A lot of technical expertise. This was not, a doctor's office where everybody has a completely other specialty. There were a lot of highly technical users here that inadvertently caused a disaster, and their IT guys were not prepared to handle this. The question I want to ask you, though, is if somebody calls you, what do? I've been a production DBA for a long time, and the thing I hate is when my phone rings. Right? If I'm not at my desk and my phone rings and it says work, it's never a good call. It's never a good day. Nobody calls me to see how I'm doing. Nobody calls me to see, if I'm enjoying my time on the ski slope in Denver. They call because something is wrong. Okay? My goal as a production DBA is to not have my phone ring. I try to be proactive. I try to make sure that I'm watching the systems and I'm always on top of things so that I can handle things before they become a problem. Because if my phone rings, it's just a bad day. When your phone rings, I want you to think about it a little bit, what would you do when that happens, right? Or maybe, what do you wish you would have done ahead of time to be prepared? So, my house in the ranch in Colorado, imagine you're asleep one day, right? One night, you're relaxing, somebody calls you and they say, I've had a hardware failure, right? You're tired. Obviously, it's not a pretty sight when you wake up in the middle of the night. And somebody calls you to say, well, maybe we've had a mechanical failure with one of our hard drives, right? Maybe if you're SAN administrators like my SAN administrators, not always completely on top of the way they've carved up all the disks. And perhaps they decided to rearrange things without telling you, and one of your LUNs goes away. Maybe you've had a huge rainstorm. You guys have a lot of rain here in the UK, right? Not exactly the best weather. That's why I live in Colorado, but maybe you burn out a system. Maybe you get a thunderstorm or something. Point is, you've had a disaster of some sort, so what do? Obviously, you have to get things working right away, right? That's our top priority. And you have to get it done as quickly as you can, because when things are down, people can't work. What happens when people can't work? Your phone rings, right? We don't want our phones ringing. It's a bad day. Never want that to happen. But how do you decide what your response is immediately? Okay? Hopefully you have some SLA in place. And it's not a contract to make your life difficult. It's not there to specify exactly how you deal with every situation, but it's there to help you prioritize how you deal with situations and how much effort you spend, how much resources, how much money, how much time you spend actually getting things back together. If you don't have SLAs for your systems, I encourage you to have them, not for every single system, but for buckets of systems. If somebody calls you about the e-commerce system on the web, that's probably more important than a developer calling you about a sandbox machine. I don't know about you, but 2 a.m., I'm not sure I'm getting up for the developer. Okay? I like developers, but it's a matter of priorities. And having an SLA in place really helps you determine whether or not you respond or how you respond. That could be that I'm 24/7 for some system, but for other systems, it could be that I'll stay late if I'm at work, but I'm not coming in the middle of the night. And it just helps you really to set expectations with your clients and your customers and the rest of your company. When you set expectations, you reduce a lot of arguments. It becomes very easy then to decide, how do we respond to systems? What's the priority? Am I willing to push other work off to get this fixed? And it helps you do that. Part of building an SLA, though, is understanding what these two concepts at the bottom, RTO and RPO. It's recovery time objective, recovery point objective. And if you're not familiar with them, you ought to be, and you should use those as a basis for deciding what your SLA is. Now, RPO is essentially data loss. It's really when something happens, how much data am I allowed to lose? Everybody says, I want 0 data loss, 100% uptime, right? You can get to 0 data loss. It requires some good technology decisions, but you just have to be aware that that's okay. A lot of times that's not always appropriate, though. For development machines, maybe for other machines, data warehouses where I can reload the entire thing, I'm not going to worry about that so much. For my e-commerce system, it's probably important. Today, though, what I really want to talk about is your RTO, which is your recovery time objective. That means from when the disaster occurs, how long until the system is back up and running. And the more that you can reduce that time, the less the impact of disaster, the happier your customers are, and hopefully the less your phone rings, right? That they know it's not as big a deal because Steve's on the ball, right? The system went down, he'll have it back up quickly, I don't have to call him. So let's break down RTO just a little bit so that we can understand what's involved and then maybe how we can fix things or lessen this impact. First thing is your alert time. Alert time is disaster occurs, somebody's aware there's a disaster. And you would think we all know right away your system went down, but that's not always the case. I've had systems where, imagine today's Saturday, a development machine goes down today. Do you know about it? The developer might not know about it. He might be on holiday or he's enjoying this weekend. He comes back Monday and he's busy with something else. He might not realize it's down until Tuesday when he really needs to do some work, and then he calls you, right? We don't like being called, right? We established that. And Tuesday morning he says, you got to fix this right away. And you may have other work in place. Alert time sometimes can be substantial, and you want to reduce that as much as possible. Once you know about the alert, you then have to actually get to the system. Right? That's your response time. That could be, you know about it, you log on remotely. It could be that there's a hardware failure. Somebody actually has to physically go find that machine. Okay? Assessment time is once you get to the machine, how do you figure out what's wrong? It's not always obvious what's wrong or what you need to do to figure out what's wrong, right? If it's a hard drive, do I have to look at a bunch of hard drives? Do I have to turn each one on individually, move them to another machine? There's any number of things that are involved in your assessments here. Once you know what's wrong, what do? Well, you have to decide what to do. And these days, a lot of times, not only do you have to decide what to do, you have to get somebody to approve that you're allowed to do that, they will authorize an expenditure of time, expenditure of money, something else. Of course, you have to fix it, right? Well aware of that. And then the last thing is you have to validate that you actually fixed it correctly. Unfortunately, there's been a number of times where I've seen people say, I fixed the problem, everybody go to work, and then 10 minutes later or an hour later, you realize they didn't fix the problem. We still have an issue. You always want to validate your systems. The only thing worse than having downtime is having downtime twice, where you have to take a system back down because you didn't do it correctly the first time. Right? I'm sure none of you like asking somebody to do something, if you've ever hired a contractor or somebody to help you, and them not finish the job and you have to call them again to do something else. You want everything finished the first time, part of being professional. We talk about these times, there's a scale, and the scale can vary widely. Right? If our developer's on vacation, the machine goes down today, it might be days before we raise an alert. Right? You ought to be able to get that down to milliseconds though. You ought to know and be proactive that when something goes down, you're aware of it. The rest of these things can vary quite a bit. Unfortunately, decision time is one of those that you think would be very quickly. I decide what to do, somebody agrees, and they would say go, but whenever you get a group of people together, especially a large group, sometimes decisions can take hours. You'd be surprised sometimes, and I've been in large organizations, that it's taken a couple hours for people to decide, yes, we can do this. All right, so go back to our hardware. We got called in the middle of the night, we know something's wrong, hardware has to be replaced, obviously. We have to restore the system. Could be anything from, I've got to do an actual restore of the system to, from tape or disk, or it could be that, I lost temp DB on my LUN, we put a new LUN up, I reboot the system, and everything's working. Could be something else, test it obviously, and then we let people back in. What if I could rewind the clock? What if I could think back ahead of time and go, hardware is going to fail sometime in the next year, what could I do to be prepared for that? I'm a big sports guy. I like sports, and you follow me. This is one of those sayings that I think is very appropriate in a lot of places. Best offense is good defense. Anybody here a soccer fan? Right? None of you? Rugby? You guys know how to play soccer though, right? That's football in here in the U.S. Not real football, but it's UK football. Right? If Manchester United gives up 5 goals a game, is that a problem? Not really, right? What if they score 7 goals every game? 5 goals don't matter. The more proactive you can be, the more you can take things in your own hands and make them happen, then maybe you don't worry so much about what your defense is. Okay? Same thing applies in our systems. Alert time is one of these places, whereas if you can reduce that, if I can know today that a development machine's failed, maybe I can get that fixed tomorrow night, or maybe I get it fixed Monday morning before anybody else realizes that something went wrong. Maybe I can know that before somebody raises a trouble ticket and calls the help desk or calls me to fix something, I'm already aware of it and I'm already working on the problem. Okay? Having monitoring in place is huge. It can really solve a lot of problems, especially in the database arena, because when the database goes down, it seems like everybody knows about it. In SQL Server, we have a bunch of options here. We have alerts built into the platform. If you don't use alerts, you ought to use alerts. They're a great way for you to be aware of what's happening on your system. We have performance-based alerts. We have alerts for different events that occur. The eventing system in Windows is growing all the time. Putting those alerts in place is fantastic. We have policy-based management in SQL Server 2008 and later. Does anybody use policy-based management out of curiosity? A few people. It's a fantastic tool that allows you to not only be aware of changes. When changes occur, you can have some kind of alert go out or send a message out. But more importantly, you can prevent issues. Doesn't help you for hardware necessarily, but in lots of places in your system, if you prevent changes, if you prevent people from doing something stupid, like setting max memory to 10 meg, you can solve a lot of problems ahead of time. Same thing with auditing. If you've got auditing in place, you can be aware of what's changing on your system, what's happening, what kind of problems might occur, if you're reading those audit logs regularly. I don't mean reading, like sitting there looking through them, but you have a process in place that looks for certain things that have occurred, and then it responds. I could lose a disk in SQL Server and the server continue to run, even on a live database. But perhaps I can have a process in place that's looking for different failures to occur. Now, SQL Monitor is a system that we make at Redgate. I work for Redgate, obviously. And this is an alerting system that allows you to basically write a check and alerting is set up. Monitoring is set up on your servers. You don't have to really configure anything. We've got all these predefined alerts in there. It'll let you know when all kinds of things happen on your server. You can customize it and make changes. One of the things I want to show is we use this SQL Server Central. I run the site, and we set this up a few years ago. And this runs in real time. Our IT guys actually use it. And at monitor.redgate.com, we actually expose that data to you so you can actually see what's happening on my servers. This isn't the live monitor system. We actually replicate this data to another system because I have 2 administrators, and I don't want all 50,000 of you deciding to go mess with my monitor server. But it is real data. Those are actually real machine names or our hosted servers. We have 2 instances on each node of that cluster, and we have real alerts here. We don't clear these alerts that often because I want you to be able to see what happens, because if we clear them out, it's a fairly boring system. Not a lot to see, but you can go look at real data and see what's happening. One of the things we configure is all these alerts. Machine Unreachable is configured automatically for you. You don't have to worry. It's enabled. It's there. If my machine were to go down because of hardware, in minutes, somebody is alerted. We integrate with pagers. We integrate with email. IT guys are alerted right away that they need to respond and go fix things. Hopefully they don't call me, because I don't like people calling me. But they're aware, and they can go fix this right away. You don't have to use SQL Monitor. There's any number of ways you can monitor. There's other companies that do it. You can set up your own thing, but you ought to have monitoring in place. And you ought to have those alerts reduced down so that you're aware when anything happens on your systems. The more you can reduce this, the better you look in your jobs, and the less your phone will ring, hopefully. All right. How about response time? Anybody here on call, on a regular basis? Anybody here have to respond to a call inside of, say, 15 minutes? A few people. You would think that you can always respond in minutes, right? If somebody calls you these days, you've got a cellular phone, a smartphone of some sort that you can respond. But do you sit at home at your desk and wait for somebody to call you when you're on call? Does anybody? I don't, right? I do things like I go to the grocery store, right? I go to buy milk and bread and eggs. What happens if you get called in the grocery store? Put the milk down, you have to abandon your cart. You have to go find your car. If you're like me, it's never close to the store, right? I guess these days you guys have to go find a train or a bus or something, right? We don't have those in the US really, but you have to drive home or get home, right? I have a nice car. I get to enjoy my ride home, but I still got to go home, and I'm far away. Then you have to log into VPN, of course, right? And your VPN hopefully is better than my VPN, because it always takes me like 4 tries to log in to the UK. Point is, in all organizations that I've found, response time is always, always, always longer than you think. It's never going to be minutes. It could be. You could be sitting at your desk. You could be, out in the front yard. You could be eating dinner. You could respond in seconds or minutes. But a lot of times, it's not going to occur. Okay? How do we reduce this? There's any number of ways. The biggest thing these days is with mobile devices of some sort. For years, I've worked in companies where we've had a shared laptop, that we pass off to the next guy and say, all right, you're on call. Please don't call me. I don't have the laptop anymore. That's a really poor way of doing things, because the laptops change. He's going to drop it. He's going to decide he's going to configure the colors to be like green on black, and I'm going to be unable to read it. And it'll take me 10 minutes to reconfigure things just so that I can read the screen. These days, having a VM of some sort is a much better solution. You can have all your tools, all your software, all your scripts available on there. You can have your password systems. You guys have password systems, right, where you save passwords off. You can have that on there. You can have logins and links to various vendors, to your cloud server that keeps track of all your scripts. All that stuff should be there. Smartphones, tablets, iPads, whatever you use, you want to make sure you've got all your software there that's you may need. SQL Monitor, I've mentioned, works in a browser. So any browser, any device that will read a browser can use that. If you've got other software, though, you want to make sure that it works on any type of mobile device you use to respond. Last thing you need remote connectivity as well. You may not be at home. You may not be sitting in Starbucks where you can get Wi-Fi. You may be somewhere on the road. You want to make sure you have some kind of device. I have a friend that works for Lego. He has a 15-minute response when he's on call. He actually has a little plug-in USB device that plugs into his laptop that allows him to connect to the cellular network almost anywhere. So if he does get called, he can respond quickly. He doesn't have to drive home. I could be sitting in the parking lot of the grocery store and actually be working on something if I have to. Last thing is rules. I live in Colorado. We have these things called mountains. You guys ever seen them? The UK is flat, right? This is like a mountain. When I go to the mountains, I don't always have my phone working. When I go skiing, if I cross the backside of Keystone, I have no connectivity. Right? So there's these 10, 15-minute windows where I have no connectivity. Grants Fritchie's a scoutmaster. I'm a scoutmaster for the Boy Scouts with my son. When we go camping, a lot of times we have no access to the phone. I mean, we're literally a half an hour away from getting a signal to communicate with the world. When I was on call with J.D. Edwards, we were not allowed to go to the mountains. Right? It wasn't a big deal. We weren't on call every day, but that was one of those rules that was in place to prevent issues. In 2 weeks' time, you guys have a little event going on here. I think a few people are coming from out of town. They're going to play some games, have some fun. Do you think you should be allowed to go to Wembley Stadium, whatever they call it these days, if you're on call? You're allowed to attend an event like that? First of all, if you've ever been to a place with 60 or 80,000 people, a lot of times your cell phone doesn't work. We don't build cellular networks to handle those peak loads. Even if it works, what are the odds you'll be able to get out of there in a reasonable amount of time and get to a laptop and actually respond to an issue or get back to the office? It could be hours. Imagine the soccer match ends and you get called on the way out of the stadium. What are the odds you're going to find a bus or a train or somebody pick you up to get you to the office? Right? Not a big deal. Again, the rules aren't meant there to make your job harder. They're meant there just to mitigate issues. Right? If you have tickets to an event, you want to make sure somebody else is on call or somebody else covers for you. All right? Make a trade. I'll buy you a beer. You're on call. We'll trade. Okay? But it's important to know those in advance. You set those expectations in advance so that you can respond to issues. How you decide what to fix. This comes down to your knowledge, your experience, your skill, your talent. All the things that, the reason you're here today is to try to learn a little bit more. Okay? The more that you can work on this, you go to places like SQL Server Central, you come to events like this, you ask for training classes. All that stuff is important to reduce assessment time. All that is sharing knowledge, right? I'm trying to share knowledge with you, Grant's sharing knowledge with you, Brad's sharing knowledge. You should do that. You should also do that inside your company because you're going to have your own quirks, your own idiosyncrasies inside your systems. You should talk with each other. At one large company I worked at, we had 20 system administrators, Exchange people, SharePoint people, SQL people, et cetera. And we did a meeting every single week where we had a status meeting. Not a big, long meeting. A lot of times it was 10 minutes long where we just say, this is what's going on that's going to change this week. But the one standing agenda item we had was that any disaster that occurred was to be shared. You shared what happened, how you fixed it, and what do you do to mitigate it. Okay? Not a long thing, 2 or 3 minutes where you just talk about, we had a log fill up, here's how you fix it. Okay? We ran out of disk space, the Exchange guys blew up a server, whatever happened. And that allowed us to share all this information. It was kind of oral. We did take some notes and send them around, but it really wasn't long-lasting. What would have been better, and what I've seen done at a few companies, is they have a blog or a wiki or something inside the company where they document some of this stuff, and then they share it to new people. Because as we turn over staff, we want to transfer knowledge as much as possible. How many of you wish that the last guy or the last girl that worked in your company had actually documented a problem with the system so that when it occurs every 3 weeks, you know what to do, or you're aware of what goes wrong, right? You should document for the next guy, because you might get a job tomorrow where you leave. Okay? It's not a big deal. I'm a big fan of blogging for your career, of being able to showcase your knowledge in the future. You can do this internally, blog somewhere that shares with the rest of your company, take that same information, remove the password, remove the server name, the IPs, all the other proprietary stuff, and publish that on a blog on the internet, or keep a document somewhere else that you can bring to your next interview. The other thing is very few companies have, but it's always a good idea, is to have some kind of run book that says, these are common issues that we have to deal with, here's how we mitigate them. Okay? Usually you take the most experienced people and you build a set of processes which are a little more than an outline, but they're not every screenshot that you have to deal with. Okay? It's just enough that will teach somebody how to solve a problem if they have a little bit of knowledge. Okay? Most experienced people write it, least experienced people test it, because then you'll find issues. If you're a DBA, let the Windows guy test it. He may not understand everything. You can explain some things to him, but you'll find out if you have these leaps of logic where you've completely forgotten a step that somebody should know. Okay? If you want to say, I need to restore to a point in time, you got to make sure you say restore the full, restore the log, but if there's a diff, restore the diff. It's easy to forget that step because you do it every day, but for the next person, you want to make sure that you at least spell it out in a logical order. All right, feel like I am, figure out most of your managers don't get a lot of work done, especially when they get in a group, right? They do something like this. When you have to present a decision to somebody or you have to go get authorization a lot of times, this can be a very hard way to get something done. Same time, you don't want to be the only person that's responsible for making a decision, okay? Sometimes you have to be, but you don't necessarily want to take that responsibility. Unless you own the business and you cut the check, you want to make sure that the guy that does cut the check or the girl that does cut the check is aware of what you're doing, okay? When it comes time to make a decision, you want to reduce that time. There's a few things you can do. First of all, make sure you understand what's wrong. Has anybody ever had you come up to you and told you that we've got this problem here and they didn't really understand the problem or they understand half the problem, okay? It happens all the time. We have complex systems these days. If you don't know what's wrong, ask for help. Go get a second opinion. Ask your buddy to just sanity check what you're doing. Okay? Try to make sure you understand the problem. And then have multiple ways to fix it. I had a friend that was in the Air Force, and in his first position, he noticed there was a problem. He was a young guy just out of college. He goes into his commanding officer's office and says, "We've got this problem with the system." His commanding officer says, "You need to go outside, come back in." So he walks back outside and comes back in and says, "We've got this problem that I think we should fix it." And he gets told, "Go back outside, do that again." So he walks back outside, he thinks about it for a second, and he comes back in and he says, "We've got a problem, and I think this is what we should do." And the commanding officer says, "That's better, but there's three things you need to understand. First, don't ever bring me a problem without a solution. I never want to see that again." Right? And that's good advice for us. You should never go point out problems to people unless you've got some idea of how to fix it. Second thing is, don't give me one option to fix it. All right? Always give me a couple of ways that we can tackle this. This guy said three things. We don't always have three ways to fix things, but we ought to have at least a couple of ways to fix something. Third thing is, don't ever just give me solutions, recommend something. The person that you're going to see to talk to typically doesn't have the knowledge you have. They're not the expert. So they want your opinion on what you think is the best way to fix things. Okay? So always have a recommendation in place. When you present this to somebody, present it to a small group. I don't know how your crisis teams work. When I've worked in large organizations, typically we have crises and they result in this large response. At PeopleSoft, typically we would have 3 or 4 managers that would respond, a couple of directors, a vice president, and then any number of experts that would get together in a room, 20 or 30 people, and they would discuss what was the problem with our CRM system, how do we fix it, a lot of arguing back and forth. Okay? Trying to get a decision made in an environment like that takes hours because managers are worried about politics, they argue with each other, their people argue with them, nobody can decide what to do. Okay? When I was a manager there, I always had my DBAs come in, find me, pull me out of the room and say, "This is the problem, this is what we think we should do to fix it." Okay? And then a couple of us would decide, "Let's do this," and I'll go present it to the group, "This is what we're doing." Right? And if somebody really is upset, I can always stop things, but I don't have this huge debate about it. I try to present, "This is what we're doing." Okay? Same thing for you. If you want decisions to make quickly, go talk to your manager or document what you want to do and make the decision and just go yourself. But don't go to a large group of people and try to get something done. Don't try to build consensus among 10 people. It's just not going to work. Obviously, you have to fix things, right? To mitigate this, to reduce this time, there's a few things to do. Now, in our hardware example, having spare parts available makes sense. How many of you, if you get called to replace hardware, know where to go get new hard drives? Or know how to order them from Dell? A lot of times we don't know how to do that, right? But I guarantee you, when your hardware fails, the guy who's responsible for hardware is going to be on holiday. He's going to be in the Canary Islands, and he's not going to answer his phone. Because I wouldn't answer my phone if I were him. This is the kind of stuff you could have on your spare laptop, but it should be in your password system. It should be spread out to people so that if they get in trouble and they need to go access a resource, they know how to log on, or they know who to call, or maybe more importantly, they know how to pay for it. Totally don't mind buying hardware out of my pocket as long as they'll pay me back. But you need to know that in advance, right? Talk to your manager in advance and say, "If I really get stuck, can I spend £100 without you screaming at me or refusing to pay me back?" Right? It's not that hard to do, but just have the conversation ahead of time. Be prepared. And then practice, right? Practice doing different things. For us, as software people, developers, DBAs, whatever, that means that we should practice responding and restoring systems for various disasters. Now, at Redgate, we make all these tools. We've got SQL Backup, we've got Virtual Restore, we've got Data Compare. And I just want to show you in SQL Backup, if I need to do a restore, it's not that hard for me to do that. I have the ability to just pick a tool and connect in here, and I can look at my restores. For example, if I've got to talk to a Windows administrator, it's very easy for me to talk to him and say, this is what I need you to do. I need you to go and drop down and pick the server name that failed. Right? I need you to pick the most recent backup and select it. In this case, I happen to pick a transaction log, but the tool actually went ahead and figured it out for me that I also need a full backup. Again, it's not hard to do. For most DBAs, this is trivial for you to do this, but if you're walking somebody through it over the phone, sometimes it helps to have a tool in place that will do this, or a script in place. You guys could script this, it's no problem. I've scripted it in the past. But the important thing is that whether I've used a tool that I purchased or a tool that I wrote, I've transferred this knowledge to somebody else. So it's very easy for them to just go ahead and pick things and say, all right, we're going to go. Now in this case, the tool actually warns me I've got a tail log here that's not backed up. So I've got a potential problem here. In a script, I could handle that, but I'd have to do it in advance because I might forget while I'm on the phone that there's a tail log that somebody needs to take care of. In this case, I just ignore it. Right, I can pick, let's go. If I've restored to new hardware, which is entirely possible here, the tool will let me know. Again, I could script that some other way and then go. In this case, I would never click finish here. I just wouldn't, because if I fix a problem, it's extremely important that I know what I did, because there's a good chance, at least for me, I fixed it the wrong way. So for me, if I was on the phone, I'd say, I need you to take this, I need you to copy it, and I need you to paste it somewhere else. And then I need you to save this before you run it, so that if it doesn't work, we've got a record of what occurred on my system. Okay? It's an important step. And the last thing is validate it. If you've ever brought a system back online and then realized there's a problem with it, and then had to call people and say, I know I said you could use it, I didn't really mean it. I need to take it down again. It's extremely embarrassing, it's unprofessional, it could cost you your job, right? Because if you discover it 2 days later that there was 4 hours of data that I didn't restore, and it's not there, and we can't get it back, it could be bad, okay? You should always validate your system before you turn it on. Restore with restricted user or single user, go look at it, make sure everything's okay, then turn it on to the system. Shouldn't take long. You could do it in minutes. You just have to have a process in place. Any of you that do custom software, you write your own software, you guys do test-driven development, do you write tests for your systems that validate it, that regression tests, that look at the code? You can use those same kind of tests here. Redgate would make a product called SQL Test that will automate all this stuff. It's built on the T-SQL-T framework, which is open source. You can download that yourself. I encourage you to do something like that. But in this case, I could have all these tests loaded up on my system. On a production system, I could do the restore. I could run these same tests and validate that what I've restored actually works. More importantly, I might have additional tests that I want to run in production that say, to make sure I have transactions that are less than an hour old, or I want to make sure I have a certain number of things in place for business reasons that are there in production. I can write those tests. I can click one button here and have them run. I could have a script in place. I've just got to do it ahead of time. All right, let's imagine lunchtime. You guys are there. Somebody calls you and says, hey, I want to test this new process. We're going to deploy it next week. And you decide to run a script. Now, if you're like me, you say, all right, well, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm getting ready to go to lunch. Let me run this script for you. Anybody ever done that? I don't know if you could see, but this is what I ran. By the way, I really wasn't paying attention because I was on the phone, and I ran this in production. Am I the only person that's done that? I've probably done that like 10 times. Grant's done it. I've done it. I've done it many times. What do I do? Right? There's any number of things I can do. Call your boss. Maybe. If you're like me, I start restoring first, then I call my boss. But you've got to respond, okay? what if you could turn back the clock? What could you do differently? How could you prepare for this? In this case, the alert time, response time, instantaneous, right? Because I know I made a mistake. In terms of action time, though, and decision time, there's a number of options that I could do that could recover from there very quickly. Who in SQL Server likes to do single table restores? You know how to do this? There's a few ways you can do it, okay? There's no way natively in SQL Server you can do it. There's tools, you can restore elsewhere. In this case, we make tools that will help you here. We make virtual restore, which allows you to mount a backup, so I don't need extra space as a database, and I can copy data using data compare. If anybody wants to see that later, we can show you, or the guys out here can show you how to do that. But what about if before I ever did a delete like that, I made sure I ran a backup, or maybe I ran a snapshot? If you have Enterprise Edition in SQL Server, you can run a database snapshot. If there's a problem, you can revert back immediately. The other thing you think about doing is who here, if you're going to run a delete or an insert and update, does an explicit begin transaction? Okay? You guys have probably done this before then, where you type begin transaction, and I type delete whatever, and I run it, and then I have a select statement that says, okay, did I actually do what I think I did correctly? And if I didn't, I can type rollback and just roll back immediately. All right? That's the equivalent of a snapshot. Those are the kinds of habits that you get into to solve problems ahead of time. But you've got to be prepared. You've got to think about doing that ahead of time. You can use auditing. Auditing is great, but if you have auditing in place, can you use that auditing data to recover your system very quickly? You can if you've got scripts written that will read the audit data and build the transactions you need to recover stuff. Most people build auditing and never build anything to deal with the auditing data. Okay? It's not that hard to do, but you got to do it in advance. You certainly don't want to do it when your phone's ringing and your boss walks in your office and he's upset because you just deleted all the lookup data. There are a few companies that make log reader tools. If any of you use SQL 2000, Redgate makes a log reader tool for 2000 that's free. You can just go download it from redgate.com. There's no money in log reader tools, so there's not many companies that make them, but they will read the transaction log and undo transactions for you. And then I mentioned virtual restores as well. All right. You come in Monday morning, you sit down, you got a cup of coffee, you're about to take a sip, and somebody calls you and says, got this weird 824 error on my web browser. And if you're like me, your heart just kind of skips. Right? You don't need a coffee anymore because right away you realize it's going to be a long day. Okay? 823, 824, 825 are corruption errors. They're bad. They're really bad. By the way, this is what happened to Pixar, right? Hadn't tested their backups, had corruption occurring across, for them, months, but weeks. Who here wants to restore a 2-week-old database and talk to your boss about it? Any of you? I don't like going back 2 days. Okay? 2 weeks would suck. What do? Well, a lot of things you can do, right away. You need to do something. Last item, you probably check your resume. Okay? If you got to go back 2 weeks, you might need it. Okay? Good backup, good resume. You only got to have one. All right? But you got to have one. All right? Let's go backwards, though. What can I do ahead of time here? Can't prevent corruption. Hopefully you're aware of that. You cannot prevent corruption. Not a single thing you do. It's not something you did or didn't do in your system. Okay? Corruption occurs. Power surge, memory gets scribbled, mechanical failure, bad drivers. There's just nothing you can do. Only thing that can help you here is you detect it as fast as you can, as soon as possible. The way you do that is you run dbcc check db on every database every day. Does anybody do that?
No.
A few people do it. If you're a small shop, usually you can do that. Larger shops, it's harder. If you can't run it every day, run it every week. Okay? On any database that you care about the data, please run it every single week. If you remember nothing else today, remember, I'm going to run CheckDB every week on every database. Okay? How can you do that? Well, usually it's a resource issue, right? We've got time, we've got space. You can script this yourself. You can write T-SQL scripts to do this. You can copy backups somewhere else. You can restore them. You can run CheckDB. There's any number of ways you can do it. A couple of our products here will make this much easier. With Virtual Restore, I can mount that backup file without using the space. Okay, and that's very valuable. I just want to show you a couple things here that show you how this works. In this case, I've got Virtual Restore here, and I've actually picked a full and a log backup just to show you that it works. You don't have to do that, right? You could have my restores. Here I have all the normal options you expect with a restore. In this case, I've got a virtual file here. Again, I don't run this, right? What I really want to do is I want to pick this script, and eventually my VM will respond. And then I want to save this off, but I can use this script. I can put it in a job. I can add some logic around that would fix these names here, and then run this, right? And the thing is here, where's my handy dandy thing? Sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time very well. I can run this, put this in a job, and add that to the job. So it automatically runs for me. Then I don't have a space issue because this just kind of handles it for me. The other thing is SQL Backup Pro. We added this recently, and it's a very cool feature. In version 7, anybody use version 7 out of curiosity? This is the infomercial part of this show. One of the things we added in here is I can do a scheduled restore. So I can overwrite an existing database on a different server. I can pick a workstation. I can use Developer Edition. I can do any number of things here. I can create a new database and overwrite it on subsequent backups, so it becomes very easy to schedule this stuff out. In this case, let's just pick something. Fix my files, which is always a good thing. I can have it schedule DBCC for me. And more importantly, perhaps, here in the bottom, I can have it remove the database. So I can have it always remove it, or I can remove it only on success. But if I schedule these, I can use one server doing all this validation for me. Perhaps I have one system, and its responsibility is on every different day of the week, it restores some other primary production system, and it does this check. This would allow me to know as soon as possible, if I can't do it every day, but at least within a week, that there's corruption in my system, and then I have to deal with it. Right? The sooner I detect corruption, the more chance I have of minimizing that data loss.
When you run the DBCC on a virtual restore, how valid is it?
Absolutely valid. She asked when I run CheckDB on virtual restore, how valid is it? When I look at a backup file, it contains all of my data, okay? And the way backup works is it grabs pages from SQL Server and it throws them to disk as fast as possible. And those are the actual pages that go, okay? So when I read those pages, I get back what's in production. If I have corruption in production, it gets written into the backup file, and there's no check on that. All I can check is that what I read and what I wrote are the same. Okay? When I use virtual restore, all I'm doing is indexing and reading that entire backup file. So CheckDB runs against it exactly the same that it runs on your production database. Okay? There's other tools that do virtual restores as well, but this is the one that Redgate makes. Again, if I run this, I can set this up. I can check if I've got security issues. Nice little thing to know about. And then save all. I can create a schedule here, obviously, and do whatever I need to do for my system. Okay. Got to run CheckDB. Right? If you're not doing it, please set that up next week. Again, if that's the only thing you remember today, remember that. The other thing you should have is you should have somebody checking vendor lists and being aware of your firmware, of being aware of drivers. 99.9% of all corruption problems are caused by hardware or software. It's not SQL Server. It's not usually Windows. All right, it's usually caused by some kind of driver, some kind of firmware. Your HBA firmware is out of date. Your SAN drivers are incorrect. The bugs are found all the time. Okay? Your SAN administrators, storage administrators, they should be checking for this stuff. They should be aware of any problems that are cropping up on whatever system you use. Ask them to be on the watch list, maybe even subscribe yourself. Talk to, if you're on EMSC or Hitachi or whatever, watch those lists and look for problems occurring. Okay? That way you can update your drivers before the corruption hits you. All right, last thing we'll talk about before we take a break, because I don't know about you, but I'm kind of hungry. It's not the time to be running production code right now. Friday night's date night for me. Anybody else? Anybody married? A couple times a month, my wife and I go out without the kids, date night. Friday night's also when most deployments take place, at least in the US. Why? Because, the rest of the world's gone, right? You guys are asleep. Australia doesn't come online until Sunday morning. It's a great time to do deployments because if something fails, I got 24 hours usually to fix it. Okay? Anybody ever get called by a developer that says, I didn't really deploy the right code? Can you fix this for me? What do you do? Well, any developers do rollback scripts? Any of you guys get rollback scripts? Not very often, right? Most developers hate writing roll forward scripts, much less roll back scripts. Okay? You can do what you want to do, right? But a lot of times it ends up being a restore. But if we could go backwards, right? If we could think about this ahead of time, we know we're going to deploy code 20 times this year, right? Or every week. I worked at a place we deployed every single week. Every week. Across 18 months, we rolled back twice. How do we do that? We had good process in place. We were prepared to roll back. We had rollback scripts in place. If you have Enterprise Edition, use snapshots. I mean, I think they're worthless for reporting and other stuff, but for rollbacks, patches, service packs, use snapshots, okay? Better than backup and restore. If you have to, you can use backup restore. Now, at Redgate, for 11 years, 12 years now, comparison is our bread and butter, right? Does anybody use Compare, SQL Compare? Fantastic tool, right? It's amazing. We use that. We have data compare that will compare data as well, and then recently we have source control, which will actually take your database and stick it in source control. The cool thing about that, and let me just pop up compare so I can show you, as soon as I can figure out where it is. Version 10 by now, okay, we're in 10. Compare looks at the state of two different databases, right? Two different systems, and it allows me to look at them. Now in this case, I'll just go ahead and pick two systems just for the heck of it. Let's assume this is my test system, this is my production system. What this will do is essentially look and say, what's the difference? Okay, and typically for development, I might go to test. And what I want to do is I want to know, what am I going to move? Now there's all kinds of options here. I can pick certain tables. You know, it'll let me kind of pick and choose. When I run this, it gives me a script, right? That's my deployment script. That's my roll forward script, okay? That's the script you run on test. What you do then is you should save that script off, okay? Because I'm not going to run this to go from test to production. Whatever I ran on test is what has to run on production. That's the only way I know things work, okay? Nice thing about this tool is I have this cool little button here. Guys see this button? Pay attention, databases are switching sides, right? This is my roll forward script. This is my rollback script, okay? I run this, I save it, I come back here, I click this, I run it again, I save this again. This is my rollback script. If I have a problem, I roll back. There's no excuse for a developer not to use this and give it to you and say, here's what's going, and here's how I get back if I have a problem. Now, the nice thing about this tool is I can actually compare to source control as well, so I can pull from source control. If I have any of those other problems, I can compare to a backup file as well. Data compare works just like this. This is a great way to recover when you deleted everything out of a table. You can recover that data from a backup really quickly like this, okay? And what's more, I can use virtual restore restore all my logs to get to 5 minutes ago when I screwed everything up. And then I could do a comparison to pull that data back. Kind of a cool little tool. Is this available online? No, this is desktop software, Windows software. It's available for purchase, though. Tell my boss I said that, by the way. He'll be really happy. There's comparison. So I've been a DBA for 20 years in various capacities, and these are the 4 things I showed you. Almost every disaster I've been a part of is one of these, okay? I've got, code errors. These could be bugs. These could be deployed to the wrong server. It could be any number of things. Hardware is hardware. Error, user error, or DBA error, right? Make mistakes. Developer error, something. Or corruption. Almost everything is one of these. Now, how you deal with those is up to you. You should use some kind of tool, right? You don't have to buy a tool. You can build your own tool. You can use scripting. You guys are smart. You can read SQL Server Central or, MSDN or whatever, figure out how to do this stuff. Or you can buy tools, from Redgate. Other vendors are available as well. But you want to have something in place ahead of time that allows you to respond to any kind of issue. Something you've practiced working with, something that you're aware of. And then if you use tools, you can transfer knowledge to other people. So the next junior DBA or junior developer doesn't have to know every nuance of how this script works or how this tool works. They should understand something, but they shouldn't necessarily have to be able to recreate it. they have this tool in place to make their job easier so that they can respond. Okay? That's it for today. Fill out your evaluations, please. There'll be an entry drawing. You guys can win fabulous prizes of some sort. If you got questions, I'll be here for a while. Lunch is out there if you want, and then resources here. You can download this deck later. This session will be online. Other sessions will be online in a month or so. And thanks for coming. Hope you enjoyed it, and have a great day.